Let's go. My name is Mark Goskowitz, and I am from Tri-Gably Farm in Colchester, Connecticut. Now, talking about orchards and everything, everybody's going to be from different places, and so you're going to kind of have to know your growing area. We already chatted about. There are going to be things that definitely do well in Georgia and can do well up here in the temperate zone in Connecticut, and but then may fail as we move into Canada. There are going to be things that thrive up north, but then don't do as well down south. Um, and they're going to be maybe strains or cultivars or something like that, different varieties of those plants that might be better suited. So as you dive into this, yes, there's a lot of reading. It can be overwhelming, the research. I think having your goals in mind of what is your total vision, and that's kind of what we do with this. We talk about a lot of things, but it's all to give you a bunch of ideas as you're planning your orchard, as you're planning where you're going to plant fruits, and you're going to establish them for possibly decades. And so where's a good place to put them, and what is it that you want? Does it just that you want to explore lots of different plants? Like me, I just love having different types of plants and knowing lots of different things. But I also love the idea of, like, I plant it once and I do a little bit of maintenance every year and then I get fruit for a long time. I love that, versus replanting things over and over. So growing up, my experience that relates to this topic, growing up, my father had an orchard, my grandfather before him, my grand yeah, and we had apple, pear, and peach trees, and we had some berries. We had some raspberries and blackberries. And I learned from my father just basic, simple ways of how to prune them. We didn't have the internet back then, and a neighbor, a couple houses down, he had a little apple orchard and came over and taught my dad how to prune the trees. And watching my dad, he taught me. So really, when it comes down to pruning, don't worry about it. Like, there are so many resources and you have time. You've got so much time to become your own expert at each type of tree, because they grow and it takes so long to establish them. Don't just, if there's a type of fruit that you want to grow it, plant it, whatever, do your research and make sure it's going to work in your area, in your zone. um, but but plant it because you'll have time to talk to other people like my father did, or to go out and research. We're in such a wonderful world now. um, I also then worked at Hart's Greenhouse and Florist in Canterbury, Connecticut, as a teenager. And one of my jobs among planting, as like a field hand doing lots of different things, one of my jobs was to also just to water all the plants day in and day out. Dave Hart would be like, "Yeah, I need you to go water down there." And so but I'd spend all day, use my water. And so here's the thing: is as I'd be watering, I'd be looking at all the labels, just seeing all the different types of potted plants that were out there. It's really eye-opening. Just, I never bothered with Latin names and stuff like that, but just to get a feel for, there's a lot of cool things out there at your local nurseries. And so go and peruse them, go support them. However, if you're planting in bulk, what we're going to see is that there are some better places to get lots of plants. And I am going to tell you my favorite places where I get my plants, the places that I endorse, not only because they have good products, but they are also good people. I'll tell you why. Um, Part of it is that I also started a school garden a few years ago with my friend John Wojtowicz, who also teaches classes with me. He's doing a sourdough bread class a little later today. And him and I started the school garden, and we didn't want it to just be a garden. We called it the farm because it has an orchard. It has berry plantings and all of that in it. And we established, and there's like more than 20 trees in that orchard there. And we got them through donations from different companies. And that's why I endorse these companies now, because they gave to nonprofits like us in our little school garden. And I got a chance to see their product, and without paying for it, because we're taking in donations. And I got a chance to see that they were good. Some of them I won't recommend because they gave us plants, but they weren't like good stock. So you won't even hear about those. I'm not going to badmouth anybody, but the ones that I mentioned later on, they are good companies to work with, and they are from like around the country. Some of them are big enough where, you know, no matter where you are, some are out in California, or there's some down south in, I think, one of the Carolinas or Florida. Anyway, as we get in. So I've had some years learning to plant, and sometimes planting can be as easy as stick a shovel in the ground, open up a pocket and shove the plant in. I know that you're going to like read and all these books and stuff that you should dig out a hole, you should put some compost in and put some lime. And here's the thing is that think about your property. If your property is a desert, not a desert, but if your property has a tough time growing things, you don't have trees growing around. The trees that are growing around your property, they're kind of like shabby and looking, then you're probably gonna have to amend the soil. However, like if you look around where you are and you know that the soil where your house is and where you're planning on planting is similar to the soil over there where those native trees are growing and they're doing fine, you probably don't have to really amend your soil. That soil there is probably going to be good enough to just start planting in your lawn and in your grass and stuff like that. So let's jump in. We'll go to the resources in the presentation that you get with this. So again, you can move my little face around on this meeting if you want. So let's see. Ooh, I see an anonymous squirrel and an anonymous, what is it? I can't read it. All right, anyway. So you get access to this handout. It's a no-brainer that this handout has the general order of the things that we're going to talk about, but it also has links, live links in it. When you click on it, it brings you to resources, books, and things that I've curated and that I've loved and that have worked for me over the years. I'm trying to accelerate your learning, taking my decades of like experience, filtering it and giving it to you, you know, as a thanks for doing this. We don't hit everything that's here. However, you know, any of these are game for like if you've got questions or whatever. I am actually, for this class, I am starting to make a collection of videos. I just started them, you know, a few weeks ago as I was actually pruning some of my trees. And so there's going to be a peach series of videos for stone fruit, your peaches, nectarines, your plums and stuff like that, like of pruning those types of trees and what to look for, starting from a first planted tree to a tree that's a few years old to a tree that's like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. You're going to see that in my orchard, is that I actually have videos of me like looking at a tree and saying, oh, what am I going to take off and why? And the same thing for pears. I don't have any young pear trees, but you'll see that they have a different growth structure. And so there's going to be a pear series, whether it's Asian pears or regular European pears. And then the same thing with the apples. I have some apples. And so the peaches and the stone fruits are pruned in an open vase shape, the open center shape structure. And I only do two methods of pruning: central leader or the open center. And the central leader one goes tall and then has scaffolding out, is going to be seen in the pears one and the apples and the apples one, because those are your main systems. Now those you can branch out to other types of trees, you know, your cherry trees and by talking about them, making little mini videos. My big point is is that as we look at these handouts, I'm going to be putting in links to those videos under the resources and stuff for this. Let's see, where is it? No. Sorry to make you. They're under the resources and places for like future learning. Where is it? Oh, yeah. Like in books and stuff, there'll be a pruning area where I'll link all those videos. So as we get in, I do have a PowerPoint. You'll get access to the recording and the handouts. Let's jump in. So you definitely know that I already teach classes. There really aren't any companion classes to this, but as you get to know me, if you want to keep supporting me, there's all the other classes I do. All right. I think the other companion class that might go with this would be the no-till gardening class, where we really talk about how to do a no-till system. And an orchard is a no-till gardening system, but you'd also learn how you can plant plants underneath your orchard. Plants. We'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about forest gardening. Another class that might interest you might be the mushroom growing class, where we talk about growing mushrooms underneath your orchard trees. But we actually get into the technicalities of how to grow mushrooms there. I'm not going to keep selling you on classes, but it's just things to consider. So as we jump in, These are the first things, the things that you really need to consider. How much space do you have to work with? Okay, so do you, in with the space, you're going to be looking at your property. And so here, let's share my property. So this is my little Marvin Road. This is where our farm is. And as we zoom in on the farm, I don't have a ton of land. All right, we've got about an acre that's workable. You can literally see the border of our little farm area, and then areas adjacent to it are family land and everything. But oh, this is our nanny's car from when we had a nanny taking care of the kids. Oh, when we couldn't do the daycare anymore and we had to switch. Anyway, here, look at this row right here. This row, I can see this is a row where planted, there are probably 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 apple trees here, and then another 4 apple trees here. Now, this is a Google image, so like there's also a row of apple trees here, and there's a row of pear trees here, and underneath that row of pear trees is raspberries. And here's my chicken coop, and along the chicken run is where I have raspberries planted around there, and rhubarb planted around my garden, and asparagus planted along the other edge of the garden. Okay, so I'm using all of those spaces, but for my main orchard, I'm thinking in lines for mowing and stuff like that. Now, you may not want to do this. You may want to have your plantings in a more ornamental way, and stuff like that. But I can actually drive my car through these with a trailer and have access and stuff like that to different areas of my yard. I can drive a garden cart through here easily. These are about I think about 30 feet apart, with each tree being about 20 feet apart. So yeah, so and I've got my peach trees are all along here, peach trees, and some almond trees here, and then I've got cherry trees down here. I've got blueberries planted over here. Underneath these apple trees and peach trees, I have gooseberries and blackberries and raspberries all planted in these rows. This right here is like a 50-foot row of raspberries. This is another 50-foot row of raspberries. There's a row of blackberries. There's a lot to do. Even though this is and my kids still have a yard to run around in the grass. I will tell you though, my kids love just even climbing the trees in the orchard now that they're tall enough to climb. So when we're thinking about space, think about this is going to help determine whether you want to really size down the trees and get dwarf trees. Now, dwarf trees are going to fruit sooner, mature sooner, but have a shorter lifespan. Okay, they won't get as big, and they won't last as long. Semi-dwarf, all right, that's going to be in between that and standard. Standard means like wild apple tree. Now, a couple of my apples and pears are standards, and they grow vigorously, and they could get like 30 feet tall, 20 feet wide, or more. And so these are going to be like substantial trees. And so I space them out substantially, 20, 30 feet apart, so that they have room for their canopy to develop. What we don't really want to have happen is to have the canopy of one tree necessarily touching the canopy of another. A little touching's fine, but we don't want them to completely crisscross. What happens with that is that the wind and the trees bumping against each other, and when they're heavy with fruit, they could take each other out, they could damage each other. And altogether, and also it's gonna reduce air circulation. So in planning this out, think about the space that you have, and think about not crowding things, but dedicating areas to them. Now, you don't have to have an apple tree planted right next to another apple tree for proper pollination. However, it is preferable to group families of trees together in your space. So when we're thinking about space, we are also thinking about grouping them together. You see, in my house, I'm talking about all the apples are planted here. If you had an apple in one corner of your yard and another one in the other corner of your yard, yeah, the bees are gonna visit that one and visit that one. However, you're increasing the likelihood of really good pollination by getting them near each other, so that as insects go from back and forth from one to another, they're more likely to. Yeah, my property is only about an acre big. I saw that question. So let's go back to this. I've got about 2 acres, but really 1 acre is like valley, and in the backyard, and about an acre in the front. I'm all front yard. So you're going to choose a layout, thinking about different ideas. of how you could lay things out so that you can move around them, mow around them, all that wonderful stuff, access them. And you might think sight lines too. What's going to look good if I put this here? I originally designed mine so that my orchard actually went up my driveway. But what I found out was that as cars needed to turn around and stuff, people were literally driving over my trees. And that ended up being a bad idea. It was too grown in, and I had to transplant those trees out, and some I lost because, you know, a UPS truck backed up into it. So thinking through practicalities of placing things, will you be limiting things? Organic practices, talking about that. So, well, thinking about the layout. Let's see, or what else? Oh yes, yeah. So dwarf. So looking at dwarf and semi-dwarf trees, Stark is an awesome company. The Stark Brothers company. They have really good products. It's one of them that I definitely endorse. Not officially endorse, but they have good stuff, and they offer a lot of variety. Dwarf, semi-dwarf, and standard trees. There's just like a good visual of like what you could see space-wise. I think if you're thinking like longevity here, you're going to want to stick with semi-dwarfs or standards or something. If you have like compact areas and you really want to fit a lot in, then yeah, you're going dwarf, semi-dwarf. Okay. Oh, okay. So that was it for that. I just wanted to check. So the 3 bullets to kind of talk about the layout. Yeah. Are you going to put it in rows? Picking, walking, mowing. I talked about all that. Yeah. Moving wheelbarrows through and garden carts through. Thinking about good airflow. In an organic practice, where you don't want to be, so here's what I'll say, is that there's only one thing I ever spray on my trees. I never have needed to do soil amending. I've had my trees here for 9 years. I'm in the future, I might need to do soil amending. I might need to add things, might add lime or add other things to the soil. As I pull fruit away from it, I might deplete the soil of something. I might need to add that back. So soil testing is important, and that's like a whole nother thing. Maybe I make a video of like doing a proper soil test. That's actually a pretty easy thing to do. And your local extension service, like I know UConn up here in Connecticut has a service where they'll do soil tests for you. And stuff like that. And it's not that expensive. It's like $20, and you can do one test and sample from all around your yard and combine the soil to get an average of what the soil is in your yard, and then send that out to get it tested to see if right in the beginning you need to change anything. It is also important to think of a soil test if you know that humans have been living and working on your land for decades before you were there, meaning lead paint and other contaminants. You really, if lead paint is of any concern, you really should get your soil tested, because you do not want to be eating food that's growing in leaded soil, contaminated soil. So if anything, it gives you a sense of relief to do a soil test and find out, oh, you know, for $20 to find out, oh, good, the lead was not detected. It's not to say that it's not there, but it makes it much more comforting. And plus you also find out if there's any big thing that's thrown off in there. Maybe you have to add lime to change the pH of the soil. Let's keep going. It's because these are all things that, like, I'm telling you to do a soil test, and then you become an expert in those things that you might be deficient in. You're gonna have to like do some future learning. And so that's where some of the books that I have might come in, and some of the resources that I have. Airflow, I do want to back up to that. Airflow is important because in an organic practices, if you don't want to spray and worry about fungal disease and rot on the fruit, you want your trees to not only be generally have a lot of airflow within them, but between the trees. So spacing them out and pruning them so that they, you know, I have trees that like I will prune them so that they don't go into the next tree. They may want to grow that far out, but I stop them from growing that far out just to keep them together. Keep them from growing together so that there's proper airflow, so that moisture, water, from overnight gets a chance to wick away and it gets cleaned out, and it reduces fungal rot. The only thing I will spray in my trees is a I don't have it with me, but it's BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It is a bacteria that that you spray on the leaves in the evening before the sun comes, well, as the sun goes down. And overnight, caterpillars will eat. So if I have caterpillars eating stuff on my trees, like gypsy moths, I spray the BT on the leaves. Or if I have a gypsy moth nest, I spray that on there, and it is a bacteria that the caterpillar eats, and then the bacteria eats the caterpillar, and the caterpillar dies. It is an organic, like, practices method of dealing with caterpillars. I've had squirrels as a problem. I've had deer as a problem, but I don't spray or do anything for that. I am somebody who, like, the thing, if I'm going to plant something, it's going to survive or die on its own, and I'm not going to want to do a lot of intervention with spraying things. This comes down to your own choice. If you're going to, like, there's lots of products out there, and I have been able to set my orchard up. The soil's good enough where I haven't had to add things. The spacing's good enough where it naturally prevents stuff. And my yard is set up in a way where I have lots of different things planted, which encourages other predators to be around to eat a lot of the bugs that are there. In the organic world, kind of taking care of all these little details helps to ensure, like, a nice growing environment where you don't have to go looking for that thing to spray on your trees. Okay, so back to the presentation. And here we go. So talking about, we didn't talk about ground covers, but a ground cover is like, what are you going to plant underneath? I think that was here. Yeah, ground covers. Yeah, depth of your topsoil. So these are things that I shouldn't skip. They're here to remind me to talk about them. Your depth of your topsoil refers to, like, how far do you go down through your topsoil before you kind of hit crummy soil. And so that might be something that you need to factor into it. Or do you have ledge where it's going to make it hard for the tree or whatever to establish roots? In that case, then maybe you don't grow trees in that area where there's ledge, but you switch to berries or something that has a smaller root system. Okay. You go to grapes, and thinking about ground cover, what you plant under your orchard trees, it can have an impact on them, because their root systems are going to go out 10, 20 feet, for a tree, and for berries, they're going to go out 4 or 5 feet beyond the plant. And they are going to network with whatever you plant there. If you've got grasses planted there, but clovers are going to invite pollinators in, and clovers are also going to add nitrogen to the soil. Thinking about what you plant under there, just scattering clover seed is an excellent idea. But other things that you plant, other ground covers, flowers and stuff like that, just think through what could really actually benefit and create a bigger, more diverse community underneath the canopy of your orchard. Because the more diverse diversity you have underneath, the more insect life you have as well, which would feed predatory insects and birds and stuff like that, and invite them in to take care of future problems. And the more pollinators you'll have naturally coming to your area with clovers and flowering plants like that. So it's worth talking about. Now, as we go to sourcing, where are the places that I like to get my stock from? Okay. These are my favorites. They're not like a limited here. So let's see, customer. Okay, yeah, these are places that not only have they donated to, like, my school garden program, but they also provide information on how to grow your plants. It's just a good practice. They don't just abandon ship on you. They've got videos and planting guides to help you to plant with success. They have awesome customer service that with each of these that have been great with replacing plants that die. If you plant a tree and it doesn't survive a year, doesn't survive to the next year, you should be able to get a replacement. You don't feel that you can't call them up. You should be able to call, and they should send you out a replacement. You might have to pay for shipping, but the plant themselves should be free. They also tend to have resistant plants that are resistant to different viruses and infections and fungi, but they're also likely to be, these are certified clean plants, meaning you're not going to be bringing a raspberry virus to your raspberry plants. If you're getting plants from a local neighbor, raspberries are a big one. There are actual like viruses that stunt the growth of raspberries and blackberries. And just by having native raspberries and blackberries near you, if you're digging up those and bringing them to your garden, you could be introducing plants that are doing well enough, but those viruses actually may attack your new plants. And so by buying plants, you are introducing clean product into your growing thing. They also have unique and hard to find and specialty things, and sometimes they offer bulk discounts. So Fedco is one of those. So Fedco is one of those companies that can sometimes be a little persnickety with when they sell plants. They to keep their quality up, they keep their plants in cold storage all winter long, and they take orders only up through a certain date, and then they will no longer take orders. And that is because, they have these deadlines. This was from last year for different types of plants. That is because they want to make sure that when they mail you a plant, it is going to do well. More companies should do this, should not just mail you a plant because you ordered it at the wrong time of year. They will only mail you a plant if it's at the right time of the year. And they have lots of things. They even have scion wood if you're into like grafting, if you want to get into grafting and stuff like that. Okay, so another great company is groworganicthis.com. This is Peaceful Valley out in California. They have awesome videos. She is in like all their videos and everything. This is one of the videos that they have. They have a great YouTube channel that you should take a look at after this. On like every type of fruit tree and different methods. They are an awesome gardening resource. Norse Farms, berries and plants and stuff like that. They have excellent stuff. Their prices are really good, especially if you're going to get, if you're going to start to get multiples of stuff. Fast growing trees, funny enough, the name, but they sell potted. A lot of their stuff is potted, greenhouse grown and potted. And so it's not bare root, which we'll talk about. It comes kind of ready to go in the ground. Great plants. And again, all of these companies have donated to me and my school garden. So I like to pay it forward by advertising a little bit for them in this. Trees of Antiquity is a really interesting company in that they have like these heirloom trees and like hard to find trees. That is worth a look at if you like want some unique stuff on your property. Trees of Antiquity is definitely one. Double A Vineyard. Now they have grapes. If you are looking for winemaking grapes, this is going to be a great first stop for you. They also have interesting stuff like willow, and lots of berry plants. They're definitely known for their grapevines. They have wine quality grapevines, but they also have eating grapes and other ones. They are an awesome company, great products that they have, blah, 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 and so this is like, depending on what you're interested in. Now thinking about, this is jumping straight into the, like, can I grow it in my area? You should use hardiness zone maps like this when you're picking out stock. You should, go ahead and look at this one and look at where you are, zoom in on a map like this and find out your zone. Are you in zone 6 or 5 or 4? Are you in zone 8? This really helps to dial in the idea of like, why didn't my plant like survive? One of the basic things that you're going to be doing is knowing the zone that you're in and not pushing it. Not going, well, I'm in zone 5, but like maybe I could get a zone 4 plant or zone 6 plant to grow. The higher the zone, the warmer the plants would like to be. And so if you're in a lower zone number, that means that your winter temperatures get colder. Your lowest winter temperatures get much colder, and your plants are less likely to survive if they're not rated for that. So this is definitely something, an absolute basic of something that you should know for your homestead. And I know for me that my zone in Connecticut is one zone higher than my friend who's like half an hour away. And he can grow a few plants that I can't grow just as well, just because he's in a different zone. My friend John Wojtowicz, who's doing that, like who started the garden with me. And so let's go back. So, and like I said, I talk. And so let's get it. So pollination is absolutely important. However, let's talk about it. There are your native bees. That I'm not saying that you have to get a colony of bees. However, I will say I am a beekeeper and I teach a beekeeping class, a beginner beekeeping class. That one's ready to go. It's a pre-recorded one. And native bees may be enough to pollinate what you have. However, if you're thinking of a large orchard, you may want to introduce a hive or two to your area. You'll get the benefit of bees really densely pollinating your trees and your apple trees, your peach trees, whatever. But you'll also get honey and pollen and all those other things. So here's the thing, of course, underneath the canopy, you could, to attract native pollinators, plant a diversity of flowers. That is an absolute basic of how do you get native pollinators involved. There is a bee called the mason bee. Now, these are not honeybees. Mason bees, look at them. They are covered in fuzz. Now, what they do is a mason bee lives its life in little hollows like this. And you see how it's coated in pollen? Mason bees are true like native pollinators that we don't pay a lot of attention to because they're solitary bees. They live on their own and they only live within a few thousand feet of where they're born. So that means that like if once you have a little mason bee colony and you see that there's some of them are there, the bees that are born from there will stay in your local orchard. Mason bees can have become like a little known secret of the backyard orchard grower, because encouraging the health, encouraging the nesting sites for mason bees, you encourage them to visit your plants next year. And so here's the thing about mason bees is that they are really in tune with their local area. They do not spend the whole summer and spring and fall like looking for nectar and pollen like honeybees do. That's what's great about honeybees is that they are always on the search for nectar and pollen to feed their whole colony and to breed. Mason bees are solitary. And so when they hatch out, each female will find a male, they'll mate, boom. And then each female becomes her own queen. Males die. And that female goes out and is looking for flowers. And what does she do? She doesn't like gracefully land on the flower. She dive bombs it. Poof. And she smacks into the flower and the pollen just latches on to all that hair. And then she dive bombs into another flower, another flower. It is like chaotic. You're like, what is this bee doing when you see them out there? And then, every now and then they'll stop. Then they'll land on the flower and they'll drink nectar. But what they're doing is gathering all that pollen on their back. And then they go into the little tube. And that mason bee is a mason because what she does is she takes the pollen off of her, packs it in the end of the tube. So you can think of like a woodpecker hole. You could think of a reed that's bent over in an opening in a reed, in a plant, in a stalk. And she packs that pollen in, lays an egg, and then goes to a little muddy spot, finds some mud, brings it and covers over that. And then she does that over and over and over, filling up the tube with eggs and pollen and masonry. And so a super cool little project you could do is looking up mason bee houses and make your own by drilling them in or doing these like little cardboard things. Yep, you got little mason bee houses that look like this. Mine has never been this dense, my mason bee houses, but it is an excellent idea to get in touch with some of your local pollinators. So pollination is important. And I think one of the only things I would say is that when you're looking up trees, it can be confusing because some will say self-pollinating and some will say needs to be paired with. And that's where, when you're buying trees from one of our trusted companies, when you're buying trees from one of our trusted companies, you're going to be reading about the pollination. This is something that you're going to have to take into account and go, like, this apple tree is an early flower. It flowers early in the season, so it's going to need another apple tree to flower early in the season to pair with it. And this is why, when you're setting up an orchard, typically you're not planting one of any one type of tree. Even if your trees are self-pollinating, it is a good practice, meaning that you could, a self-pollinating tree means that you could plant one tree what do I have that's I can't even remember what's self-pollinating, because I just have such a diversity of trees. Let's say I had a cherry tree that was self-pollinating and I plant it. It would produce fruit all on its own. It would pollinate itself by bees coming to it, touching one flower to another flower to another flower. However, you will get more fruit and better pollination by having 2 trees, 3 trees, whatever. So when you're thinking about this, you really should try to cluster different types of trees together. Now, that typically means that, like with peaches, you're going to have several varieties of peaches, several varieties of apple trees. I have solved the problem of pollination by not worrying about when does the tree flower, but by numbers. And I will try to plant 4 or 5 different types of peach trees, 4 or 5 different types of pears. In reality, I have like 25 different apple trees, but I could get away with 4 that were different varieties that were likely fruited at different times of the year, flowered at different times of the year. So all just things to think about, not to get overwhelmed at. I'm trying to give you the hack of, if you have the space and you are willing to not plant the same type of tree, meaning Golden Delicious, or they're all going to be Golden Delicious because I love Golden, or they're all going to be Granny Smith. I'm just picking a name. They're all going to be Granny Smith. I love Granny Smith. You might need to have another type of tree built into that to pollinate with those Granny Smiths, and you might have to hunt down that a tree that's going to flower at the same time. All right, time wise, we're about halfway through this hour and a half. So we still got a lot of stuff to talk about, but my pollination, that's an important one. And I hope that I've tried to like decode the idea that, like, you don't necessarily need a hive of bees, but your native pollinators can do the job for you. But I would encourage you to plant lots of things for those, lots of flowers, lots of different types of flowers around your yard. Become somebody who loves flowers and plant them under your orchard trees to encourage lots of different native pollinators to be around, your bumblebees and even ants and stuff like that, and to learn about different ones. Let's see, planting trees. I'm going to give you an opportunity, if you had any questions, to type. There are a few bullets I just wanted to make to talk about. One bullet was diversity. I think I just talked about that. The benefit of having diverse plantings is that one is pollination. Another is you're going to get plants fruiting at different times of the year. If you have these apples, you might not have to do all your apple harvesting all at once. You might get one type of apple now, then later, and spreading out the harvest. You could also strategically, like my friend John, he doesn't like to have his harvest spread out. He likes to do all his cherry harvests at once. So he strategically chose cherries that fruit and flower at the same time, so that he can do all that harvesting all at once in bulk and save time. Me, I love the idea of spreading it out. So not only am I have different varieties, but when I'm picking out those varieties, I'm having fun choosing varieties that fruit in June, and then July, and then August. This tree fruits that, or raspberry. I love the variety of raspberries that I have. I have at least 6. No, I planted at least 7 different varieties of raspberries. I got ones that are kind of black and some that are kind of yellow and red raspberries, and they all fruit at different times. And that means that any time in the summer we go out, there's something to pick, and my kids love it. And so that's my philosophy. Somebody like my friend John, nothing against it. He strategically plants only 1 or 2 varieties of raspberries so he can harvest them all at once and process them and store them all at once. So diversity, it means a lot of different things, not just different species, but also different varieties within those species, different types of apples. There are words that in this that you're going to hear, buzzwords like polyculture. All that means, polyculture means many, many things that you're growing. It means that you're not just growing apples in your orchard. You're going to plant apples and pears and peaches. Or, you're going to mix it up and you're going to have other things planted in there. Typically, the homegrown gardener is going to be interested in polyculture. So that could be something that you look up later. What is polyculture? What are those things? So other words that you might come across, permaculture. Okay, that's in the handouts. Permaculture design and everything really fits in well with the if you've never heard of permaculture, I want to open your mind that that's one that you probably, if you're taking this class, you probably really want to look into afterwards, is what is permaculture? What does it mean? It's about designing food systems, growing systems, and a culture. That's a bigger thing of permaculture, is actually getting other people involved. And maybe even getting your whole neighborhood on board and looking at what does it look like if to have a really sustainable system locally, and it comes down to the individual. So that's where I really like it for just the individual stuff that I can do. Teaching these classes is a bit of permaculture, trying to encourage agriculture around anybody who wants to take these videos. And that makes everybody more sustainable by watching these things. Permaculture is a really neat philosophy and it has a lot of different ways to look at it. You'll hear the term food forest. We'll talk about that. It's about turning your front yard into a food forest, where you can go out and harvest lots of different things from lots of different areas. Restoration agriculture is a term where you are taking land that is blighted or damaged in one way and restoring it into viable agricultural land. Orchards are an excellent way to flip damaged lands that weren't growing things into productive land. So if you have a property that could really benefit from some restoration, there are books like this one, Restoration Agriculture, an amazing book that, again, part of this is to open your eyes to different things. Let's see any of these other ones. Okay, yeah. Yep, okay, keep going, and yeah. So we talked about the idea of thinking about when you might want things to fruit. Disease resistance might be something that you think about. I don't think about it. I plant things, and if I see that they are failing, I cut them down. But if you want to think about it, you can. Taste, texture, storage, kitchen use, and quality. Yeah, or quantity. Definitely, when you're looking at traits of different things, you might really want to look at different types of plants because of their taste, their texture. You might want to look into heirloom plants because they've got tastes that have been around for years, decades, and have unique properties to them. All right, let's get into planting. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Let's do it. Let's go to planting. So you're going to get your plants, and what do you do? I think with this, what I'd like you to know is that you do not need to become an expert overnight. Okay? Yeah, I didn't. You will become your own expert for the things that you grow as you choose to buy them. You're going to have a certain budget and you're going to invest, and you're going to be like, I'm going to get peach and apple and pear trees this year. Good. You will become a bit of an expert, not a total, in those trees. As you plant them, you're going to look it up a few days before you're going to plant it. You're going to look them up and you're going to learn what you need. And then later on, as you need to prune them, you're going to look it up in the winter. You don't have to know all the answers now. You just get them in the ground and get them to survive. And then you really have years to really fine tune this and to learn more. Do not be overwhelmed, because that's what you'll do, is that you will find your books and you will look up and be like, oh, I really should do something with those apple trees. You will be motivated to go find stuff out about apple trees. and to read it with a grain of salt, not worrying about every little detail, but saying, I read this and this and this. What are they all saying that I should do? That's it, So when you get plants, you could get bare root plants. That means that they dig the plant up and they shake off all the dirt, maybe even wash off all the dirt, and then they store it in cold storage with some wet sawdust and stuff like that to keep the roots protected. But they are literally bare root plants, and they come packed typically in either sawdust or shredded newsprint that's wet. You could get a balled and burlapped plant. Let's see. I've rarely gotten plants that are like that. The only plants that I've ever gotten that were that way were my, what do you call boxwoods, which are not fruit trees and stuff like that. But you learn how to unball it and to plant it, the ball as it is. You end up cutting the straps or any metal in like that, but you plant the whole ball, burlap and all, as it is, and the roots grow out from it. And you could have a container one if you're at a garden center. That they are going to be in containers, likely, maybe balled and burlapped, but definitely you're going to see containers. And so with each of these, there's some different considerations. The roots that have been established in these containers, the roots may have been wrapped around and may need to like be kind of not torn up, but kind of pried apart a little bit so that they can grow outward. So this is a bare root tree, and this is a good example of planting it. You're going to be digging a hole. And so this, you see like the little white filament here, that's a new growth. You don't want to snap those off. You want to keep all of those little bits of new white growth. Those are new rootlets that are growing that are going to be really viable. And then you want to like gently return the soil to this. And as you return the soil, as you put in a whole layer and you've covered everything, then you're going to compact it with your foot. You're going to step on it so that there's no air pockets, because an air pocket near this little rootlet would dry out and kill that little rootlet or stunt it. You want this root to be in contact, without getting broken, in contact with soil and moist soil. So you'll probably, bring the soil back in, cover it, maybe half the soil, cover it, tamp it down, water it, walk away, come back 5 minutes later, bring more soil in, tamp it down, water it again. And when I say water, I mean like a 5-gallon bucket's worth of water slowly poured into it so it seeps in. And I want you to see this. So they're using this going across the soil so almost all of the trees that we get, they're going to be grafted trees. They have a root stock and they have a scion. This is the what makes the tree. We'll talk about this, the graft union, but this is another illustration. You've got so do you have to do soil prep and stuff like this? That this comes down to you if you're going to do it. Do you have to stake it? I have never staked any of my trees, but these are all options that you can do. So here's my general method, is that my soil is good enough to plant the trees in. Yeah, the soil acidity is a little bit off. Yeah, it's not the most fertile, but it's fertile enough. And I shove a shovel in, I open up a crack, and I shove the whole plant in, tamp it down with my foot, and I move on. Literally, I know, I'm taking a $50 tree, and that's how rough I'm planting it. And as it's growing, if the wind is blowing and it pushes it over, you know what I do? I come over and I don't grab it at the top, I grab it at the base and push it straight up, and I tamp it down again weeks later to make sure that it's just growing straight. Now, if you're getting frustrated and the tree just keeps getting blown, that's when you might be doing a staking system. Okay. I have so many trees that it's not worth it it's not worth the effort to go through staking everything. It's not worth it to dig all those holes and everything. Again, you hear this balance. You might be paying $50 a tree, and it might not be good enough for you. And you might want to add compost and lime the soil and all that fun stuff. Now, so I've got an old tree that died. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. So look at this thing. Yeah, there was the rest of the tree growing up, and this was the roots. Imagine all those roots coming out. This was a bare root tree, and this is what I want you to see right here. This was a healthy root tree that was growing, a root stock tree that was growing. And what did they do to create this? What did the nursery staff do? Is that they grafted on this. Now, what is grafting? It's literally you go to, I'm going to use the Granny Smith tree because we know this works for all sorts of all sorts of different varieties, Fuji, basically like the Granny Smith that you get from the grocery store is genetically identical to every other Granny Smith that's out there. Because what happened, I'm just making up a story, but what happened was Granny Smith had, old Granny Smith had this tree on her property, and people were like, man, those are some nice green trees. I like the taste of those. The texture of those are great. They store well. And what did they do? They went over to that tree and they took a cutting from that tree, and they cut it off and they matched it up and they paired it up. They spliced it together with another apple tree that was growing. Another apple tree, that what they did is they cut it off at the top and they grafted this one on. Now, all nutrients that go through this grow to supporting the Granny Smith tree. All right, so we don't have cloning here. It's something a little different. It's grafting, all right, but it still results in a genetically identical tree. So all of the Granny all of the Granny Smith trees in the world have been taken from cuttings from previous Granny Smith trees, grafted onto this. And then now this whole process takes a couple years. That's why this now new little tree costs like, $20, $30, $40, $50, $100, depending on what you're looking at. It's because of that process. Now, if I plant this, Scion, and I plant this so that the soil comes here, this is above the soil surface, and what's going to happen is anything new that grows, grows up here, new stems and leaves and stuff like that. If I plant it like this, then what happens is the rootstock, this is a no-no. You don't want to plant this below the ground, this union. That's why I'm really taking some time to talk about it. You don't want to plant this union below the ground surface, because what would happen then is now this is in contact with the soil surface. And this union, what happens here is that sprouting from this union, the old tree, which is, who knows, probably even some unedible like type of apple. I don't mean like poison you, but like maybe it has like little crab apples and stuff like that. And it will grow from this and start to have new trees, like new growth from that. And then you'll have different types of apples growing from this one thing. And actually this just becomes a pain in the butt, because you don't want these to grow and you keep cutting these out and they keep growing. So you're going to be mindful of not burying this below the mulch and below the soil surface. Even if you put a mulch pile around this, you're going to dig around and cup out so that this union doesn't start to sprout what are called suckers. Now, also in planting, rodents like to do something, come over to this and eat around the edges of this and girdle the tree. Okay, so mice in the middle of winter are looking for easy food sources, and they come over to like your little tree that's planted and it's got like wood chips all around it, which is great. And the mice live there. And so what they'll do is they'll come right up to the edge and they'll eat that nice little soft wood tissue around and around and around and around. And what happens is they just, basically cut off the flow of nutrients from the top and the bottom. That thin outer layer of bark is something that you need to protect, because if you get rid of that thin layer of bark, you kill the entire tree. And that goes with any tree, even the standing oak tree. If you go around that oak tree like a beaver does and chew away just the bark, it stops the flow of nutrients and water in that, because the life is in that outer edge of that tree, and the whole tree dies. That's how beavers kill gigantic trees, just by girdling them. So you get plastic or whatever, little versions of these wrap around. You guys get it? All right, they wrap around this, and you shove that down into the soil. So it's also below the soil surface. Now this is going to stop, it's going to be a barrier. All right, it's going to be a barrier that's going to protect them. So collars, tree collars like this are a really good investment. You can buy 12 packs of these. And so there's links to this stuff in the handouts, little things like this. Now, I also do a little tree wrap. It's a little paper wrap, or sometimes like a little cloth wrap around this, to protect the bark from winter winds, from giving that thin baby bark a wind burn. We spent a lot of money on this tree, so I'm going to take the effort to wrap a little tree wrap around this. And it only has to be on there for the first year. The second year, take it off. And the collar could come off, but I actually leave the collar on because it expands with the growth of the tree until I know that it's got good thick bark. I can remove the collar. So that's typically 2-3 years. I just leave it on. It's also really nice because you can weed whack right up to this. and it won't kill the tree. All right, we've been talking. Let's go back. So we're talking about planting the trees. Let's see if we hit the big stuff. I mean, okay, so sometimes putting a layer, there's also a special paint that instead of wrapping it, there is a paint that's done on it. Staking it is an option. That just comes down to you. I'm just gonna look over my resources before we move on to the next thing. Just making sure I'm hitting the big bullets. And again, if you got questions, you can ask questions. Yep. So planting, my routine listed in here is just as I'm reminding myself, I typically have a 5-gallon bucket of water. If I don't have a spigot nearby, I've either got a really long hose and, in that 5-gallon bucket of water, or I'm just carry out a whole 5-gallon bucket of water. And I use that water to water the hole after I put the tree in it. And I, making sure it's soaking wet, so that those little rootlets don't dry out. Tools, tape measure. This is like a 300-foot tape that, like, you're going to buy this once, you're going to have it for a decade. Get one of these. If you're doing orchard work, you're going to want something like this to space things out, make nice rows. You're going to also want some string and some stakes to put in the ground. You'll have nice straight rows, okay, when you look down at it. But don't get the 100-footer. That's my point. Don't get the 100-footer. Go ahead and get the one that's 200 or 300 feet long, because when we're talking about orchards, we're talking about big spaces. Yeah, as you're digging, if you know that you have really rocky soils, that is where I would dig out the, like 2 feet, a 2 feet radius, meaning like a 4-foot wide. That sounds like a lot. No, a foot and a foot. And so at our school garden, we had a rocky soil, crummy soil. We dug that out, got the rocks out, put them at the edge of the woods. And then we did add compost to it to add fertility to the soil as we're adding the topsoil back in. It was mixed of compost and the topsoil back in. Yep. Okay. So an important thing, remember the 3 types of ways that you could get plants: bare root or potted plants and stuff. Potted plants are great because you're not likely to always get potted plants. Potted plants are good in that you can leave them, you can just water them and keep them alive before you're ready to plant. Bare root plants come packed with the sawdust and the shredded paper that's all wet. You want to open them immediately when they come in. Now, I don't mean like now. You got a day, all right? And you don't want to leave them in the sun. Bring them in your basement or something like that. Bring the box in your basement. They're a living organism. If you leave them in that box, wrapped in plastic for a week, that will encourage rot. They're going to rot in the box. That's why I mean open them up. Now, I have opened them up and kept them alive in the box in my cellar by making sure I open it up, and I just every day I open the plastic up to let it breathe, and then I close the plastic up and I make sure that paper's all moist. I get like a spray bottle and spray down not sopping wet, but damp. And I've been able to keep them in the basement for a few weeks. But what you really should do is at least get them in the ground. Now, healing them in means taking a shovel, making a slit, and just getting them in the ground, even if that's not their final growing place. Okay. That means that you find an area in your garden to just get the 5, you can just put them you can put them all right in the same slot. It's to protect those baby roots. It's to stop them from rotting in the bag. It's to get them in the ground. And then as soon as you can, move them from there within a few weeks or a month or so, get them to their final place. Before you plant those bare root plants, you should soak them in a bucket of water. There's where that 5-gallon bucket comes in. You should let it sit in there for 15 minutes to fully penetrate the wood and the roots. So when you're ready to finally plant them or to heal them in, you've got that bucket of water. You take your trees and you put that bundle of trees in the bucket of water, let it soak in. This also goes for raspberries and gooseberries, anything bare root. You take those berry bushes or vines, you put them in the bucket of water, let them sit for 15 minutes, then get them in the ground, how you're going to plant them. And then a few things. We talked about stakes, collars, and wraps, but mulching is important. Mulch Wood chips, since you are growing perennial plants, you want to think long-term mulches that are going to last for years, and dense like hardwood wood chips are what you're going to want to use. You are not likely going to use pine or resinous softwood trees. You're not going to want to use cedar wood chips. Okay, so cedar trees grow in cedar groves, cedar forests. Pine trees grow in pine groves and pine forests. The fruit trees that we grow and the berry bushes that we grow have evolved from deciduous trees, hardwood tree species in that type of forest. You want to use wood chips from hardwood species, oaks, maples, tulips, but poplars, whatever you've got in your area. So I just talked about this with my no-till gardening class about how to source wood chips and stuff like that. Find somebody who can dump a load of wood chips at your house for free, and just make sure that it's like that they're clean chips. It doesn't have like poison ivy or like bittersweet vine berries in it and stuff like that. So you're going to want to hunt down wood chips, and if you're growing food in it, it's like you want it to be clean. You want to kind of know where those chips came from. All right, we're moving into tools and pruning and stuff like that. Let's see. So, and interesting books along the lines of pruning. Let's see, yeah, and managing these. Let's see, do I have both books? I've only got the one book in hand, but like the Holistic Gardening, the Holistic Orchard, these are also good books for planting and for managing and for pruning. If you are of the organic mindset and you want to move beyond organic herbs and flowers and veggies, you want the Holistic Orchard or the Integrated Forest Garden books. You want those as idea books to keep you in the mindset of how do I manage this in a sustainable, organic way. Okay, and so I'm pointing you in the right direction. These are great reads. Now, a forest garden is one where this type of layout is going to be thinking about planting many different layers. So as we talk about this integrated forest gardening and holistic gardening, they all talk about looking at polycultures, planting many different types of things by planting in different canopies. So you have your fruit trees, your nut trees, you have vines maybe even growing on them or adjacent to them, and you are taking in sunlight all the way from the top canopy all the way down and converting it into food. All right, so this is just an example of the different things that you could plant at the different levels: your roots, your herbs, your flowers, and your veggies. A forest garden takes into takes something that could just be apples, just an apple orchard. And as this is growing, as this like little apple tree was really small for 10 years, while it was really small, you could have had 10 years of growth growing all in the surface area underneath this. Look at all the wasted space while this was developing. Now it's a fully grown tree, and it doesn't make sense to grow lots of things under here, but you could still have berries growing under here. The forest gardening method, and polycultures, what has been shown to happen is that if you plant many different things like that, if you look at any one plant, let's say the raspberries that are growing underneath it, or the grapes that are growing underneath the canopy of the tree, yes, the tree is taking some of the sunlight from those, and the individual raspberry and grape plants will be less productive individually, but as a whole, they will produce more biomass and more food for you in that forest garden method in the same space that you have than just having a fruit tree and another fruit tree, or just having no fruit trees and just a row of berries. So that is the model that I use. My garden outside, my orchard, is a forest garden model where I have things planted underneath the canopy of my trees. Now, I'm not doing a crazy full model where I'm also thinking about little tiny layers. I have two layers in my model, which is a canopy layer of the trees, and then another either veggie, fruit, or herb layer, or flowers underneath those. And so I have hundreds of feet to play with. Taking this class, I want to open your mind to the idea of growing things underneath the canopy of your trees. Now, Possible content to add. So this is me making notes as I was looking through this. Is looking. This is the end of the presentation, but I've still got more to talk about. And I was thinking about, as I was looking at over this morning, I was like, well, maybe you could. I demonstrate, and we're going to go through the tools that I like to use and a little bit of the pruning basics. So we got about 15-20 minutes left as we look at things. Feel free to ask questions. Just scanning ahead. We're going to focus on pruning now. I'm scanning through the bottom just to make sure. Yeah, we'll also get through what could a model year look like. Okay. We already talked about pest and disease with regard to airflow and encouraging diverse plantings to get birds in there, to things. And we talked a little bit about rodents. We didn't talk about deer and deer pressure. That's going to be, depending on where you live, you could not just deer, but depending on where you live in the world, you could have other things that could really decimate your orchard. It's going to be up to you to decide how much of like an Elmer Fudd you want to be about it. Do you really want to go out and kill those wabbits? Do you want to trap them? Do you want to put up fencing? There are methods for keeping out these animals, but it typically involves putting up structures around the whole perimeter, which creates an investment. Now, I keep referring to my friend John because I've seen him grow his orchard along with me. He has a defined orchard space. It's probably a couple 100 feet by 100 feet, and he's got probably a dozen fruit trees in it behind his house, and he has deer pressure. And so the story I'll share with you is just how did he set it up to keep the deer out? He densely planted his trees in that area so that he knew that he was going to have to battle the deer. And as soon as he planted young trees there, he started to put up a simple fence, a simple fence of just nothing crazy, just wire fence around it. And on top of it, he had 10-foot tall stakes that went up top, and he ran wire. He secured 2 wires to the top of that, one at the very top at 10 feet, and then another couple feet below at 8 feet. And what that does with deterring deer, this is what I'm saying, is that like whatever your pest is, if you really know that you have to defend against it, you're going to look for a model that's going to work best in your situation. And with deer, you either build out to make it difficult for them to jump in, or you build up. And so he chose to build up because that's the space that he had. And the deer do not come into his orchard area because he went up, and he didn't go all the way up with the fencing. He's got like a 6-foot tall fence, and then 2 feet above that is a wire, 2 feet above that is another wire. Okay. And it's enough to deter the deer because they're not going to want to jump into wire and fencing. Now, if you just had the 6-foot tall fence, those deer are going to be jumping over that 6-foot tall fence. That's why you had to add the wires. And he, what else? Yeah. So I've had rabbits as an issue, and they're mostly an issue in my vegetable garden. I've had deer as an issue. What I found is by moving things that the deer like to eat into the center of my yard, the deer don't come into the center of my yard. So the apples and the pears are in the center of my yard. They don't like to eat the peach trees and the cherry trees, which are at the edge, and the blueberries and stuff like that. I am adding videos of pruning. The sharpening, yeah, I'll definitely add that. And if it's not a video that I made, I'll at least find. I think the sharpening one, there's definitely going to be people that are better at describing sharpening than I am. But I will curate that. I will take the time to find a video that shows the method that I use for sharpening and use that. Yep, and we'll definitely have pruning videos. So let's get into some pruning basics. Good. So, and tools. This is a quick tool, a hori, which is a spaded knife. It's got a curve to it. This is a digging knife for, now I show this to you because it's a big knife. It's fun. Okay, but anyway, I have a couple of these. This is my demonstration one. That's why it's like not used. It has a sharp blade. It's got like a ruler on it. I never used a ruler. It's got a serrated blade. Now that serrated blade is really nice. If you need to transplant something, sometimes this is a really nice thing to have. on, you know, on your belt or in your tool bucket or tool thing next to you to pull it out, because that serrated blade can really, you know, quickly go through things. So if you're transplanting, moving, if you're digging up raspberries and stuff like that, that's a big blade, the Hori Hori. Okay. Okay. The first tool that you're going to need when you prune, and likely, you know, likely early on, is just a simple set of shears. Okay. This one's, the brand name is Corona. So, okay. But anyway, yeah, good luck Googling that. So, but anyway, excellent brand. They make, this whole thing is steel all the way down and then coated with plastic. You want which brands do I like? This is it. You know, no product endorsement or anything like that, but I use these shears. Now they are bypass shears. You'll have bypass shears, so that means the blade bot goes past the anvil, slicing off as you prune. There, I don't have any because I don't like them. There's also anvil pruners or loppers where it has an anvil and the blade comes right to it. Every time blade comes right to it. I've always been a fan of bypass ones. I found that the anvil ones just haven't done it for me. Anyway, point being with this is that it's got a nice strong spring. What you're looking for in a pair of shears is something that you can easily have access to the blade to sharpen later on. Okay, you're going to want something that is not made of plastic. And so I have two others that I don't like. Okay, I don't know brands on these, and so I'm not gonna good. We're not mentioning brands. This one, why I don't like it is that it's plastic. I know it's going to fail over time. This little spring inside is a different type of spring, and this keeps popping out on me, and I lose it and I find it on the ground. It is much different than that type of spring that is embedded on this. I can't get that spring off, you know, without a tool. These little compression, little cylindrical springs like that, I don't like them. I have also found that as this comes together, the plastic is so close together that sometimes I've pinched my fingers in this, and it's very frustrating. Now, this is the first pair that I had when I started out, a little $10 pair, and it got me through my first year. It also just doesn't have a lot of leverage. This one, like, what's it rated for? I know that I can cut stuff that's pretty thick with these as well. This one I've pinched my hand on a lot. With this one, I thought that this was going to be a really good one. It's like, oh, I can clip it to my belt, and it's got like a little lock, but the blades are so small. And this is what I found is I like this one for picking flowers, okay, but not for pruning trees. This is not made for pruning trees. This is made for little tiny stuff, little blade, little tiny stuff. Again, let's just even just side by side comparison. It doesn't look like a big difference in the blade size, but it is. And also just like the leverage of where your hands are versus like the leverage point here is much further out. It's frustrating to use a little cheap plastic pair of these. And I've also pinched my hand so many times in between this where the plastic meets. This, I have never pinched my hand as I use these. It's got a simple little lock. Okay, so these are going to cost some money. I think I paid $40 for these. You're going to use them every year. You're going to love them, and you're not going to be frustrated with those. Get something like this. And this is like your bread and butter. Now, as your tree grows up, you're not even going to need these loppers, loppers like this. So the next tool that you would need would eventually be loppers. You don't even need a saw like this till much later. And I do have like this little saw and everything, but I've rarely used it because I got a big set of loppers that has a mechanical advantage up here. Now this one, yeah, I recommend you get this. If you see something like this, it's got a little gear system up here that allows it, as you're doing it, to have a mechanical advantage to cut bigger things. So as your tree grows, now this is an investment that you're going to have. So your biggest investment up front is the cost of the trees. I keep focusing on trees, but like these are still the same pruners that I use for my grapevines, for my berry bushes. The pruning of those is just like a simple thing. I actually have a video on pruning the raspberries that I'm going to be uploading soon. You'll have access to that. You do not need to worry about pruning your first year. That's what I want to say to you. Get the stuff in the ground, worry about planting, worrying about keeping it alive, and enjoy the fact that it's going to grow. And you have so much time to worry about pruning. And you're not going to worry about it because it's simple. You're going to first just be taking off little tiny twigs. In the first couple years, you'll be able to use just this. Then eventually some things will get big and you'll be like, I kind of need to get that. And you will need this going forward. You will need something like this. And your reach on this, the longer you get the ones with the longest handles you can have. I don't know how big this is, but I think I've got a link in the resources. Now, the one tool that I don't have, because my friend John borrowed it last fall and he's bringing it later today, but he doesn't have it here, is the pole pruner. You don't need that until like you're 4 or 5, 6 years into this. And the trees are so tall that you can't reach them. That's a good problem to have. And at that point, you can spend the $100 on a really good pole pruner. And at that point, you have already invested hundreds of dollars in your trees, maybe even thousands, depending on how big you are. And at that point, you want to keep them tidy. You want to be able to have control the growth up at the top. So the videos that I started making on pruning and the shape and everything, you're going to enjoy them, because in 5 minutes you'll see how I go from a small tree and then I walk over to one that's a few years older, and you see how the structure has changed depending on how I pruned it. And then you walk over to another one. So as we're talking about pruning basics, I've got this. So we could imagine this as the tree. We could imagine this as growing from the main trunk of the tree. We could imagine this in many different places. As I went to the yard and I found this piece of trimming, I was like, oh, this is a good demonstration piece. Okay, so if we imagine this as the first year tree, if I was going for an open centered design, what I would start to do is I might keep it down to 1, 2, 3 lateral, horizontal growth things, and encourage this to keep growing out horizontally and get rid of the center spike, this center growth, so that it would stop growing straight up. All right. And then I would have my main branching out here. Now I would limit this, all right, to three main trunks, limbs going out from the center. And I would actually be trimming these little buds off. Okay. It's not very important, but anytime you're taking something off, you're discouraging growth in that direction, encouraging growth in the other directions. So by pruning, you are helping to choose, where does the energy go? Now, as I look down this, you see these are kind of close together compared to this one, this one over here. And so it may not be as balanced. So I've got this little one growing here. I might choose to cut this off right above here and force growth out that bud. So wherever there's a bud, and if you cut it right above that bud, you will encourage growth going out in that direction. So as we look at this, now let's say I did want the center leader system and I didn't want all this growth yet. Or maybe I didn't like how steep of a V this is here. That's not going to support fruit very well. However, look at that angle. It's a more opened up angle. This is going to support fruit really well as this thickens up and becomes a main lateral branch. I'm going to want to encourage this one. I may completely lop this one off and hope that one of these other ones develops. Look at that, that little angle right there develops a better growing angle. This one right here, that's good enough. But you see, like a very tight crotch is likely to shear off once it has, 100 or more pounds of, a couple hundred pounds of fruit on it in the future. So sometimes you make these tough choices. As we look at this, I also want you to look at, you see this union right here. So this gray bark goes up into this newer bark. And you can see right here, this is where I cut this last year. I can see where new growth happened, where cuts were made. I can see where cuts were made and new growth occurred within 1 year. I can see along here that I cut this one here and then new growth happened here. So what am I doing in talking with this? Let's imagine that this is one limb that's already coming out of the tree. What do I want to encourage? Okay, so as I look at this, I want to discourage anything that's going to be growing down that could get pulled too far down on this. So I would actually lop this off. Okay. I would also want to discourage vertical growth. Again, this is a limb coming out of the tree. I want to encourage it to grow out, to grow not too far down, and to not grow straight out. And I would get rid of this, making a flush cut there. Okay, now I could keep both of these. I could keep both of these, or I could limit it to just one of them. So here's some choices with this. Let's say I get it down to, I like this fork. Let's say I like that fork, but I want them to grow away from each other. What I do is I look along here and I look at the buds, and wherever I cut, if I cut on a bud that's facing the other branch, this will grow towards the other branch. It'll follow that bud. But if I cut right above a bud here that's facing the camera, that's growing away from this other branch, and I cut right there-ish, then that bud becomes the new growth for the rest of the stem to grow. It no longer will grow a leaf. It will grow a stem, that a little branch that goes off in that direction. So if I wanted to encourage this to grow down, I would find a bud that is pointing downward. If I wanted this to grow up, I would cut and leave a bud that is growing on the upper part. You really change the direction of the tree as it's growing by choosing these different buds. So as you're looking around it, and the buds are kind of spiraling around us, so you can always find a new bud. Now, so that's the basics, is looking at the shape of the tree and encouraging growth in the directions you want. So I will have a tree where maybe it's even like this. At this point, if the coming out of here, do you see how I would get rid of this because it's hanging too low? And I would encourage that. And again, if it's like this, I would make the decision to get rid of if this is how the limb was coming out of the tree, I would get rid of this because now this is more vertical growth. I want to encourage this, and I would get rid of that. And then I would find a bud that is facing outward and snip just above that bud. And now I am encouraging this whole branch to then take a diversion and to go like this. You see how I changed the direction? If I cut here, I would keep it going up, 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 up. But since I cut all this, I'm forcing all energy to go to this endpoint, and to not just, if I cut on this bud, this is an inside bud, if I cut right above here, then it would defeat the purpose. It would then grow up here and grow straight here. But since I have an outside bud, it will grow from that outside bud in that direction. It's kind of really cool stuff. Here's the thing, you're going to make mistakes. It's okay. That's why I suggest, as we get to the end of this right now, and I look at my handouts right here, I say, what do you want to plant this year? Let me just kind of go through that. And start with trees. Whenever you're starting an orchard, start with trees. I know we didn't talk about grapes and all those other things. I would intend to make videos for them if that's something that you're interested in. With each one of those things, what we're really talking about is the holistic approach to how do you set up an orchard. And so what you've learned here is looking at the spaces. You're looking at the big pictures. What do you want to get out of this? And it really does come down to you, that like, if you want to grow grapes, and that's the one thing that you join this class for, you still have heard all the things that you need to look at in growing grapes. The same thing of like pruning, looking at buds and stuff like that. That all comes down, it comes down to the same basics of you snip here, it's going to do this now. With grapes and training those, we don't need to get into the nitty gritty because you're going to plant it. You're going to observe what the plant does. You're going to follow up on that one type of thing, on that one type of plant. You're going to become a little expert at it. Okay. So overall, we're looking at all of the keywords, the key things that you're going to be looking at. You're going to be tooled up correctly to work with anything in your orchard. So if you are looking for a diverse orchard, here's what I would suggest. If at all you ever want to get trees involved in your orchard, get the trees planted early on. So here's a sample, and then plant the things that you like and try to plant every spring and fall. If you can get the money to do a spring planting and add some stuff and do a fall planting, that's what I did. And eventually within a few years, you've budgeted together and you've filled your orchard with plants over the course of a few falls and a few springs. So here's a first sample year to start. So in the first year, if you started off with peach trees and apple trees, okay, why peach and apple? Peach, because Peaches and those stone fruit, so substitute peach with any stone fruit, they mature fast and come to their first fruiting very fast. And then if you also do an apples, and those families, apples and pears, that are in the same kind of family of things. If you did your apples and your pears, so I'm just saying, do peaches, but you could also say, no, not peaches. I'm going to start with cherries. They will be your first fruiters because of the type of trees that they are. And you'll be happy because as you're waiting for those apples to come along in the plan, eventually the peaches will fruit and you will have already started the apples, the things that take a really long time. So what I'm suggesting is pick a couple things that you know that you want, and maybe plant one thing that's going to harvest soon and one thing that's going to harvest later, so that you get some of the rewards sooner, and that you have gotten the things that are going to take a long time to establish in the ground sooner. You're hearing both of that, but I'm not saying plant everything. So get some raspberries and blackberries, maybe some asparagus trees, maybe nut trees, and mulch them, stake them, get them, do what you need to do. I don't stake them, but mulch them and get them in. And that's your first year. It's just getting stuff that takes a while to establish, those trees, but having some berries in there, because you know what? Those are going to mature even faster than any of the trees. Now, the second year, maybe you branch out, you get some pear and cherries, maybe you get some grapes in there and some blueberries. These are kind of things that, like, they're going to take some time to establish, but here's the thing, and replace any die outs, and start underplanting with herbs and flowers and veggies next year. And then here's the thing, that first year, since you planted raspberries and blackberries, you're going to have raspberries and blackberries that next year. And your orchard will already be producing for you while you're waiting for those long things to establish. Now, your third year, you maybe bring in some nectarines, some plums, some gooseberries and currants, some of the oddballs, some of those things that are less common. All right. And you build supports for your blackberries, and you build your trellises for your grapes. You don't have to do that the first year. You build it later as the plants get bigger and need the support. Don't get overwhelmed with it. You don't have to do it all at once. So that third year, then you're actually building your trellises and stuff like that. And that's when you're going to get your first asparagus harvest from the previous year. It took a couple of years, and you're also getting berries. Now, your fourth year is mostly maintenance. In 3 years, you've established all of this diversity. And then in the fourth year, it's mostly maintenance and training, and you're getting your first peaches and grapes that third year, likely. All right. And then in your fifth and sixth years, it's almost everything is mature. Maybe not the apples, but you're starting to get almost everything in those fifth and sixth years, and it's mostly maintenance and pruning. And again, you don't have to be an expert in the pruning. You learn little bits as you go. I hope that you become inspired by this. Thank you so much for supporting me in this. You've already heard me on the companion classes that I teach that could take you deeper into the other things. You're going to see links in the descriptions to some really good pruning books. These are great Bibles where you look up that thing that you want to look up and learn it in the moment. You don't have to become an expert yet. I will be putting together some videos this spring and attaching them. Yeah, thank you so much.